In the meanwhile, it'll be nice to know from everyone because Ilahi, she told me that we have people joining in from multiple countries. And yeah, it'll be nice to see where you guys are from and tell us.
Yeah, let us know in the chat where you're joining from tonight.
And also tell us if you have any specific questions, because I do know that some of you might be directly joining, even if you hadn't like filled out the registration form, because we did have a question on the form saying that, you know, like, do you have any questions or something? But yeah, if you haven't filled out the registration form and you're just joining in, then yeah, tell us in the chat if you have any specific questions for me. If it's in the zone of this webinar, then sure, I will try to address them as we go on. If not, then I will answer them, like, you know, personally to you, no problem.
Yeah, I think we can start. I would like to firstly say good evening, everyone. And I would like to welcome you all. And we see that we have from India, people from India, Italy, and mostly India. And I suppose that it's very late in India now, but it's evening in here, Bulgaria. But please turn on your cameras. We would like to see your faces. And we would also like to take a photograph in the end. So turn your cameras on in the end as well, and share pictures of the event in your social medias, and remember to tag us on Instagram, tag us GCMEDURES. I can write it in the chat as well. And
yes, it's basically short for GCMED That's like medical education and research. Med, there's another edu in the middle. It's med edu res. So I'll just write that, no problem. Its Instagram is GC med edu res. In fact, I will put in the link right here so that if you want, then you can directly go to our Instagram from here. Yeah, hopefully the link works, because whenever I put links on the chat, it's never clickable. It's always like just a link. So let's hope. Yeah, I think it'll be clickable. And we are also on LinkedIn, actually. And we are trying to be more active on LinkedIn as we go forward. Right now, our PR team is like super swamped. So that's why we are not very active on LinkedIn. But on LinkedIn, you can just find us as Global Consortium of Medical Education and Research. I'll type that down as well. In the meanwhile, if you want to start with the introduction and like, you know, get it going, then yeah, go ahead.
Before I introduce you, I would also like to say that whenever you like what is being said, or you've understood something new or learned something new, you may react with applause or write it +1 in the chat. I'll show an example in the chat. So either applause or +1. And also during the session, if you want to ask anything, raise your hand. There's a raise your hand option, and we call your name, and you may unmute yourself, or you may write your questions or comments in the chat as well. So I think everyone is here now. I am Elahe, a fifth-year medical student. I'm one of the ambassadors of Bulgaria. We also have Judith here, who is the other ambassador. Would you like to introduce yourself, Judith?
Hi guys, I'm Judith, fifth year as well, the other ambassador with Elahe. Nice to meet you, and I hope you have a good session today.
And we have events head, Pradeepa. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Hello, my name is Pradeepa and I'm the events head, and I hope you all enjoy the event.
Thank you. And we have Dr. Oshin Behl, who is the founder and global president at GCMER. She has consulted numerous medical companies on product strategy and growth, and she's currently a participant of the Harvard Leadership in Medicine course. Inspired by the global healthcare startup ecosystem, she's now creating India's first physician-led healthcare accelerator program called Futura Heal. Futura Heal is a unique accelerator program, and not only for startups, but also for medical students who enjoy medical innovation. The first step in medical innovation, according to Dr. Oshin, is understanding the design thinking process. So we welcome her to talk to you all and hope that you apply your learning from today, not only in the work, but also in life. If you would like to join the 2022 cohort for the Futura Heal program, we will be posting the application form and LinkedIn page in the chat. I'll do that now. So the stage is yours, Oshin.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, so can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. So before we even start, I would like to just point out that this is a workshop, right? And I will not be like sharing like theory with you, and I will not be bombarding you with like terms which are like complicated and all of that. This is basically like a beginning step for everyone to just understand what the design thinking process is and possibly apply it. And also, one thing that you all must remember is that since this is a workshop, I will encourage everyone to ask questions, raise your hand so that, like the decorum is maintained, but at the same time, I would like to interact with you because I don't want it to be like a, monologue where I'm just sort of didactically just telling you about something. And this is a stepping stone for GCMER as well, because we know that there are like numerous medical student associations who, focus on specifically medical education and also research, of course. So we want to bring something new to the table. We don't want us to be just another organization that people join and, get like a few benefits here and there. We actually wanted to contribute to your learning, to your medical career possibly. If in the chat box you guys can write if you like which year student you are in medicine, and also what idea you have of design thinking so far. Like, what do you think design thinking is? Like, I would like to know from you because people have different ideas. So in the chat box, if you can write what you think design thinking is, that would be great. And I'm reading the chat box, so don't worry about that. I'm continuously reading the chat box. So tell me, what is design thinking according to you? Like a few words. I'm not asking you for the entire definition, just a few words. Okay, I will wait another minute because I know that people are shy and, it's okay, no problem. Okay, so Sidra, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is a fourth-year medical student, says that it's a problem-solving technique. Absolutely. So it's great that you pointed out about the problem-solving because it's a good starting point as a definition. So if you talk about design thinking, it's basically an iterative process where we understand a problem and try to solve it, right? So as Sidra already said, it's a problem-solving technique. Or you can also say that it's an innovation process, which is inspired by empathy for the user or for anyone for whom you're trying to solve a problem, followed by ideation and implementation. So even when you talk about research, right, when you talk about making a research paper, there's always a knowledge gap, right? So that knowledge gap here is the problem statement, correct? That is the problem here. And usually that knowledge gap, like when we are doing research, the reason it's so important for medical students to learn research is because at the end of the day, it's to solve a problem for a patient. Over here, the patient is the user because the patient is the user of our medical services. So it's important to apply the process of design thinking not only in like formal innovation, like medical innovation or like making like a device, but also in research. But just to like focus on the definition that is like the simpler definition, which is, you know, iterative process. What does iterative mean exactly? Like, what does that mean? People keep saying that, you know, like, let's reiterate, iterate this and that, but what does that mean? It just means to do again and again, okay? What that means is that you cannot think of design thinking as a static point in time. You have to think of it as a process. It's a continuous process which needs to keep happening. And it's a solution-based approach to problems. But it's very easy for us to jump to solutions, right? Like we jump to conclusions. It's very easy for us to wait, can you still see my presentation? Because it says participants can now see your application. So now I don't know what you were seeing till now. But if there's any problem, Elahe, you can let me know. Okay. Okay. Yes. It's fine?
It's fine, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so it's very easy to jump to solutions, but it's important that you focus on the problem, right? And identifying the problem is where we have to start. But before you actually start, one second, yes. But before you actually start, please remember that just don't fear the process of design thinking. Don't fear brainstorming. Don't fear the whole process that goes behind coming up with a solution. And at the same time, suppress your ego, right? Because when you are design thinking along with other people, it's very easy to get attached to your solution or to your perception of the problem. But at the end of the day, it's a group activity, right? And it's important to suppress your ego and also remember that you know nothing, okay? Whenever you approach a problem, just think of it with a fresh perspective. Don't try to assume things. That's the worst thing that you can do when you're trying to come up with a solution. One of the things that I have experienced in my career as a healthcare consultant is that many medical startups, when they come up with a solution to solve a problem for the patient, they assume a lot of things, right? And which is where research comes in. And in research, it's always mentioned again and again that blinding is important. Why? Because blinding takes away the bias that we would have as someone who is interpreting the research. It's very easy to have biases, right? Like they are unconscious biases, and it's important that you keep them aside and just think of it as something that you absolutely do not know. So again, this is a chat box activity. If you can write in the chat box, what do you think is the first step in the design thinking process? Recognizing the problem, yes. Identification, yes. Empathy to the patient, needs of the patient, and identifying the problem, yes, basically. So for design thinking to start, you first need to define the problem, right? And to define the problem, you need to understand what exactly the problem is. So now, if you guys can all unmute yourself, okay? Feel free to unmute yourself and let's make it a discussion more than like a webinar lecture. So I want you guys to either unmute yourself or write down in the chat box any problem that you have identified in your hospital with patients in the hospital process, and let's pick some problems and try to solve them using the design thinking process. So if you can write down any problems that you have faced, then we will apply the steps of design thinking, that is understanding what exactly the problem is, defining it, and then proceeding with the ideation and the empathizing and all of that. So write in the chat any hospital-based problem or clinic-based problem. For example, I can give you an example. In our hospital in Pardubice, where I work, the patient always finds problems in finding a clinic, right? The hospital is changing the layout a lot of times, and the clinics keep shifting from one building to another. It's not their fault because they're expanding and they're building new clinics. So when the construction process is going on near some building, they have to shift that to somewhere else so that the patients are not disturbed. But at the same time, this causes the problem that we cause the patients to get lost, right? So yeah, so write in the chat box of any problem that you think happens in your hospital or in the clinic. Okay, so if people cannot think of problems which are coming up, okay, we have a few. One second, someone is entering. Okay. Patients and visitors struggle to find the doctor they are looking for once they arrive in the right department. Okay. Language barrier between the doctor and the patient. Yes, very true. Getting appointments on time. Okay. Giving too much information at once. Okay. So now, once you have this problem, what is the next step? Let's say that we pick the problem of the language barrier, okay? The language barrier between the doctor and the patient. So what is the next step after this? Yes, we have more problem ideas. The patient's data or file is filled manually on a sheet of paper, and oftentimes if the patient fails to follow up very soon, the data gets lost or it becomes very hard to find when the file is needed. Absolutely, I think this is a problem that many people face. The language barrier thing is a very interesting problem to solve. So let's try to go to the next step. Okay, having a translator. Okay. Any other ideas on what the next step should be? Developing a deeper understanding of the problem by conversing with the patient and the doctor. Absolutely. So as Anushka has very rightly pointed out, you might have noticed that I asked for the next step, but people are giving me solutions, right? And this is exactly what I was trying to point out, that when we are thinking about problems to solve, it's very, very easy to jump to the solution before you even understand what the problem is. Now, who had given the problem? 1 second, let me just see. Yes, Pranita. So Pranita had given us the problem that there's a language barrier between the doctor and the patient. Now, we need to actually understand how much of a problem this is. Because if we try to solve the problem before understanding how much of a problem it is and what kind of problem it is and what exactly is the problem, we cannot come up with a solution. I'll give you an example. For example, if we say that now the problem that we have identified is the language barrier and the solution is having a translator. Like, I think, yeah, Pradefa said that having a translator is the solution. That could be one of the solutions, but what if the problem itself is that the patient cannot understand the medical language of the doctor, right? In that case, the translator is not going to help. What if this isn't that much of a problem? What if the patient is able to sort of understand what the doctor says and like just writing it down would be easier, right? And what if the patient just doesn't have the mental capacity in the moment when they are sick and when they come to see the doctor to actually understand what the doctor is saying, and having a translator is not going to help. So the next step after defining the problem is building empathy, right? Because now we have to understand for whom do we want to solve which problem, right? So in this case, when we say that there's a language barrier between the patient and the doctor, I want you to write down whether you would want to solve this problem for the doctor or you would want to solve this problem for the patient. Because if you look at the problem, it's a two-sided problem, right? The doctor cannot understand what the patient is saying, maybe, and maybe the patient cannot understand the treatment that the doctor is giving. So for whom do you think it's a bigger problem, for the doctor or for the patient? Both, but more for the patient. Okay, got it. So it's more for the patient than the doctor. I personally think that it's more of a problem for the doctor, actually. Because I'll tell you why. Because when the patient comes to the doctor and they have a language barrier, what happens is that the doctor is unable to understand the problem of the patient. And we have learned in medical education that history taking and a good history is the first step to treatment. So if a patient is unable to give that history, how is the doctor supposed to treat them, right? So I personally think that it's more of a problem for the doctor, right? So this is how you're building empathy. You are trying to focus that who is this problem for exactly? Because it's very easy to look at the surface and say that, okay, you know, like this is the solution, having a translator. But if you don't know who you're solving the problem for, then you cannot give a solution that's going to work. And we are not just looking for just random solutions, we are looking for solutions that work. And once we have completed these two steps, we have defined the problem. Language barrier is a problem between doctors and patients. The next step was empathy building. We said that, okay, we want to solve this problem for doctors because we want them to understand the patient's history better and be able to come up with a better treatment for them. So the next step after this is what ideas could solve the problem. So in this ideation process, one of the most important steps is brainstorming, right? What do you understand by brainstorming? Have you ever brainstormed? How did it go? Because I know that brainstorming is not as easy as it sounds, right? Even when you're brainstorming for something as simple as, I don't know, what you want to have for dinner, you know, with your partner or with anybody you live with, even then you come up with problems, right? Someone wants this, but that's the problem. You want to go out and have food, but oh my God, who's going to drive? Or, okay, you want to cook at home, but do you have those ingredients? You know, there are so many problems, even when you're brainstorming for something as simple as that. So imagine what kind of problems you would face if you were doing brainstorming wrong for something as important as solving a problem for patients and doctors. Okay, let me just unmute this person. Okay, so I want you to tell me by unmuting yourself, please raise your hand and share your brainstorming experience. Have you ever done brainstorming? And how did it go? What problems did you face? Did it turn into an argument? Were people being judgmental? Were people being condescending about it? Tell me by unmuting yourself. I will see if anybody has raised their hand and I will ask them to unmute. One second. Yes. Come on, come on. This is not a one-way lecture, because the thing is that I can't understand what you must learn if I don't know what the problem is, right? Design thinking. Okay, so Manisha has raised her hand. Yes, Manisha.
Hi.
Yes,
So,
hi.
so usually, as you mentioned, brainstorming has been usually productive for me, but a lot of times it also depends on the context and the people I'm brainstorming with and my initial relationship with them. If it's a group of people that I'm comfortable with, I'm associated with for a longer time, and we are acquainted with how we think, we're always come with solutions that requires complementary, or there's complementary react actions, and as well as compromises as well. So it's not just something that I've been wanting to do, it's something that the other person also wants. So we're able to come to a consensus most of the times when it's a good partnership. At sometimes when the people wherein I'm not that familiar with, or with a setting that might not be as comfortable, as you said, sometimes you're shy, sometimes it might be destructive. So a lot of it depends on what is the context of the problem and how it affects us personally or as well, and the people with whom we are discussing the problem.
Absolutely. I think I agree with everything that you said, because as you said, when you are familiar with someone, it's easier to brainstorm because you can actually understand what they want, you understand how they think, you have a better understanding of how they are, right, as a person. But many a times when you are brainstorming at work, right, when you're brainstorming professionally, it's not as easy as brainstorming with someone who you are familiar with, because you don't know the person, you don't know how they think, and it's very easy to judge people as well. So I can tell you something, because when I first had this design thinking workshop, right, it was conducted by EIT Health, and we had a design thinking workshop, and they kept emphasizing the importance of not judging other people when they are brainstorming, right? And I honestly thought that, like, oh my God, like, I'm not judgmental. I am not going to judge people. Why is this person focusing so much on not being judgmental? Well, when the brainstorming actually started, one person, and the problem that we were trying to solve was about how patients get lost in hospitals, not in the sense that they can't find the clinic, but people with dementia, right? Dementia patients who get lost in hospitals because they forget where they are, and it becomes a problem for the hospital, it becomes a problem for the nurses. You have to keep an eye on them all the time. It takes a lot of work, right? So that was the problem that we were trying to solve. When we were brainstorming, one person came up with the idea that we should have televisions in the hospital room so that people don't feel like leaving the room. Okay. So overall, it sounds ridiculous, right? Like, I mean, people have to go out for, I don't know, to go to the bathroom or something. So what if they get lost there? So I was the first person to judge them, I think. And that's the reason why I'm focusing so much on not being judgmental, because that is human nature. If we don't understand something, if we don't exactly know the process, we can be quick to judge, right? And surprisingly, in the end, I was the one who was supporting that idea the most. And it ended up being almost something that I wanted to do, because we came up with the solution of having something called a bed buddy, in which bed look at of them leaving the bed unnecessarily, right? So you are reducing it to a certain extent, because when we went through all of the research, we found that patients don't get lost normally, right? They usually get lost when they are trying to roam around for a break, for a change, because they are so sick of lying in bed all day, right? So that's why I keep emphasizing the need to not judge other people. Okay, so brainstorming can happen in different ways. You can definitely do a loud brainstorming, in which, like I asked Manisha to unmute herself and she shared her problem. You can just have a conversation. There's also something called silent brainstorming. And this is just like, these are just like two of the many methods of brainstorming. And silent brainstorming works really well for shy people, right? If you have a shy person in your group, it is very difficult for them to voice their opinion. And if you have someone in the group like me, who is more than happy to voice her opinion most of the time, then it can almost become unfair to the other person, because it's not like I want to silence them, but at the same time, they are not going to speak unless they are like prodded to speak. For example, in this webinar itself, you can see that some people were more active about like typing things in the chat box and raising their hand, and it's not something that comes naturally to most people, right? And it's very difficult to do. So it's important that everybody's ideas are taken into consideration. Okay, what do you think the next step is after ideation? For example, we came up with the problem that it was a language barrier in the hospital. We said that we want to solve it for the doctor. And now we have also, let's say, we have come up with the idea that we would have a voice translator that would be attached to the table of the doctor, and anytime the patient says something, the voice translator would just translate it and display it in text, and also translate it into like a recorder or something, so that it's also recorded and the doctor has the text in front of them. Okay, so what is the next? Okay, creating solutions. Okay, so the ideation process, of course, ends in a solution, right? So let's say that we have brainstormed and we have spoken to each other about what the solution could be. You could have a translator, but it would be difficult because patient privacy, so you can't really have a random person in the room. You would have to pay a translator, right? So who would pay the translator? Would it be the doctor or the patient, right? So many problems which come up with the solution. So let's say that we have this table translator idea, and it would just be a simple device, like you have Google Translator or DeepL or all of these translators, and it would just be attached to the doctor's table. Okay, so that is the solution that we have come up with. Now the next step, I'm just going to go through the chat. To know the cause and investigate it, of course, we found the cause of the problem, which is just people don't know those many languages. And okay, application on a small scale, testing your ideas on a small scale, hypothesis testing. Why do we want to do this, or is it already covered in the previous steps? Okay, we have solved the why of the design thinking process. And this why is solved in the first two steps, right? The problem definition and the empathy building. Because we have now, finally, you will not ideate till you know that the problem is big enough and it needs to be solved. So we have covered the why in the previous steps. Okay, so testing it. Okay, testing whether the ideas are practicable and cost effective. Okay, very good. I mean, the only problem is that you have skipped one step, and that step is prototyping, right? Because what I gave you was a very vague solution, right? I gave you the solution that, it would be like a device which would be placed over there. But what software would it use? Where would it store the data? Would it be an internal storage? Would it be attached to the computer of the doctor? How could we come up with this, right? And that is, I honestly think that it's the most important step after the problem definition step, because problem definition by far is the most important step of design thinking. And then I would say prototyping is the next most important step, right? So prototyping basically involves thinking of different things which can solve the problem. Okay, so let's say that we start with a very crude prototype, and we say that the prototype is my phone, right? My phone is the prototype, and I'm just going to keep my phone on the table, and I'm going to let it record what the patient says and then translate into Google Translator, right? So that would be the prototype, and then I would see whether it works or not. But that's the next step, because in this prototyping itself, what do you think is the problem with using my phone as the prototype? Or do you think there is a problem with using my phone as the prototype? You can either raise your hand or you can put it in the chat box, either or. It might look unprofessional or like you're not paying attention to the patient. Yes, that's absolutely true. If I have my phone on the table, then possibly that could be a problem. And how could we solve this? We could maybe tell the patient that we are translating this into the phone, that could help. What other problem can you think of? It's a very logistical and healthcare specific problem. I've given you a clue. So what problem do you think this causes? Exactly, privacy issues. Because I'm using an external device which is not connected to the hospital system, which does not have the privacy regulations of the hospital, and I'm translating it, right? And I mean, I'm practically almost recording what they're saying, because we all know that they are listening, right? The whole they are listening theory is almost true, because our phones have a lot of data stored in them as cookies or in the archive. So it's important that we maintain patient confidentiality, and the phone in itself, like just using Google Translate on your phone, would not work, right? So how do you solve this problem? Any ideas? Doctor-patient relationship will be a downward spiral. The patient will be uncomfortable with the whole process. Well, that is partially true, but Ahmed, what do you think is the bigger problem? Is it a problem that, yes, is it a bigger problem that the doctor can't understand the patient and treat them? Or is it a bigger problem that, the patient will feel like the doctor is not paying attention? Honestly, doctors don't pay attention sometimes in itself. So that's something that patients take for a given. But I think that the whole patient confidentiality problem is a huge issue, because even to test the prototype, you would be breaking laws, and you cannot do that. So what do you think is the solution to this? Like, how can you maintain patient confidentiality and not, go away from the privacy laws of your hospital, but at the same time translate what they are trying to say? Asking for permission, that's true, that's consent, and written consent would be even better. But that doesn't solve the problem, because if the data of the patient goes to the cloud, then the hospital is at a risk, right? It stops being the patient's problem and it starts being the hospital's problem, because that's something that's a complete no-no for most hospitals, especially in Europe. So what do you think? How can we solve this? Maybe we can create our own app, right? We can create our own language translation and embed it into the hospital's system. What do you think about that idea? Like that prototype could be made, right? You can build the application with the option of translation, and all of that data would not be going on the cloud. It would not be an internet-based thing, or it wouldn't even be a third-party app. Having a centralized system just like CCTV, yes, that's another solution. Instead of having an app on your phone personally, you can just have an application that is centralized and is a part of the hospital computer itself. And you can use that, and that gets rid of all of the privacy issues, right? And once we have actually come up with this prototype, of course, the next step, and this completes the design thinking process, is testing, right? And here the testing would be to exactly understand what the doctor feels about it. Because over here, the user is the doctor, right? So sure, as a doctor myself, I can give some sort of validation to it and say that, I think that it would be a great idea, but that's not enough proof of concept to actually understand if the solution is working or not. So the next step, of course, is research, right? You make this prototype, you build this prototype as an application, and you install it in your hospital's computer. And you tell all the doctors in the hospital to use that application and see what they think about it, to ask them what they are experiencing when they use that application, which is a third-party software, right? And that brings us full circle in the design thinking process. And there's actually a reason why it's a circle, right? It doesn't stop at the testing, because once you actually test it, the doctors might come back to you and say, you know what, this is the problem with the application. And then the design thinking process starts again, because now you have a problem, a new problem, for which you need to build empathy separately. Because what if the doctor comes to you and says that it's fine by us, but the hospital administrator has a problem? And now your user becomes the hospital administrator for the same problem. And that's why the whole process starts again. So now you have to ideate something to solve this problem for the hospital administrator, and then prototype it and test it, and then you just have to keep going in circles. And even when you have come up with a final product and you have actually, everyone is using it continuously, you cannot stop the design thinking process there. Because all the time, there is going to be something that needs to be fixed, or something that can make the process better. Because it's important to remember why you were solving the problem, right? We wanted to solve the problem because we wanted the doctors to be able to treat the patient better. That was our goal in mind. So at the end of the day, if the translation software is just adding another step to what the doctor needs to do, then do you think that's really helping, right? So that's why design thinking is a process, and it's not just something that you do once and like you have a few meetings, you have a few brainstorming sessions, you have a prototype, and you have a solution. It's a continuous process which needs to be continued for it to be a good design thinking process. If you stop at the point of the final product, sure, you have a product, but it's not a good product because you're leaving it alone. And you cannot do that if you want to keep improving the process till it becomes the best thing for the doctor. Yes, okay. Do you have any questions related to design thinking or how you can apply it? You can unmute yourself, or I would suggest raising your hand and then unmuting yourself, because otherwise it's chaotic. So yeah, you can raise your hand if you have any questions. You can put it in the chat box. Yes, Manisha.
Yeah, as you said that this is a dynamic process and we need to do it in order to, reach to a solution that is more feasible. But how I just had a doubt, how do we decide what is a very natural endpoint? Because we could go in loops and it could become such a long, never ending process. So that, as you said, I'm only fixated on the problem with no solution just because I'm just reiterating and going through the same thing again and again. So how do we determine what is a good end point?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because of course you cannot go on and on in the design thinking process to the extent where it makes it an inefficient process, because at the end of the day, it's about efficiency, right? The real world needs efficiency. So I would say that it's important to focus on the perspective of the user, right? When the doctor or when the hospital administrator and when the patient, when all of them think that it's a good solution, that is a natural endpoint. And when I say endpoint, I'm not saying that, you ghost them and you say that, like, now just deal with it. Then the improvement becomes more of an automatic process, right? Because maybe one of the problems is that the translator is not accurate, because people have different accents. Even in a certain language, people have local dialects and all of that. So maybe the translator isn't accurate. So then how do you solve that problem? Because that's going to keep continuing. So the way to solve that is that you just keep using the data that you are collecting to improve the translator, right? Like in artificial intelligence or machine learning, more the data points, the more accurate the final product is going to be. And similarly, for anything that you are building, the more user experience you have, the more, the more users you have for your solution, the more accurate your perception of the quality of your solution is going to be. So I would say that a natural endpoint to this would be to have the doctor say that, okay, this is working, and now my patients are feeling better. Another thing is to make the endpoint a measurable thing, right? You cannot keep it vague. Because when I say that doctors are saying that it's going to make them feel better, it's a very subjective thing, right? Someday when the doctor is in a bad mood, or they had a problem with the patient which was completely unrelated to this, they might take it out on the translator, and then you have an inaccurate feedback. So you can't always rely on feedback. And to understand the measurable endpoint, it's important to go back to the problem definition and why you were trying to solve this problem. Because at the end of the day, you are trying to achieve something, right? You are trying to achieve better treatment for the patients. And we all know that there is a way to actually make the treatment better and actually measure that better treatment. Because you can measure how quickly the patient's problem was solved. You can also measure how much it recurred for the patient. So these are all measurable. I don't want to use the word KPI because it's a very technical thing to use, but yeah, that's what it is. It's a measurable KPI. It's a key performance indicator, right? And that's why it's important to keep it measurable. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to send them in the chat box. And just for revision, we started with the empathy and the definition. And can you tell me what's different in this process that I've shown you on the screen and what we have been learning so far? What's the difference? You can raise your hand, you can write it in the chat box, whatever you feel. Yes. So as Ahmed, Manisha, and Pranita have pointed out, over here they have shown that empathy comes before the definition. Now, design thinking is not an exact science. And the way that you have to look at it is different situations will need different steps, right? So for example, if I am a part of a hackathon, right? A medical hackathon where a company is asking me to solve a certain problem. So in that case, I would have to actually define the problem and then empathize. But in case I am seeing that the patient is unhappy, right? So in that case, I first have to empathize with the user or the patient and then actually come to the definition of the problem, because without actually empathizing and putting myself in their shoes, asking them what matters to them, I cannot define the problem that's going to help them, right? So that's why empathizing and defining the problem can be interchangeable steps, and it all depends on the solution itself. So that sort of brings us to the end of this workshop, but something that you must remember is that it's not just this, right? What I have introduced to you today are the absolute basics of design thinking. You must have noticed that I did not use any text slides, or I did not try to throw definitions at you. And that is because I wanted this workshop to be a building base for the future workshops that we are going to have, because we are going to get more into the details of how do you apply design thinking to medical processes. And eventually we are going to have a hackathon in which we will be giving you problems and you can solve them. And I feel like that really would contribute to better clinicians and even better researchers. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And yeah, please fill out the feedback form which Pradefa has sent, I think. I will stop sharing my screen now and come back here. Okay. I think this is the form, right? Okay. So please fill out the feedback form because this is mainly used for the certificates. And yeah, if you fill them out, then we sort of know what you want, because it also acts as feedback for us for future workshops and future activities in general of GCMER. And as I think it's also there in the chat box, the link to the Futura Heal Medical Acceleration Program. If you guys want to know more about that, just let me know and I will tell you, because I'm not entirely sure how many of you are interested in medical innovation in general. Because this was obviously a basic workshop which you can apply anywhere. You can apply it for research, you can apply it for medical practice. And we will delve deeper into the medical innovation process, and it's going to get more and more specific. So yeah, if there are no questions, any closing remarks?
Dr. Oshin, there were two questions from two people in the registration form. So one was from Vikram Singh, if you want to ask the question.
Yeah, what was the question exactly?
If not, I'll read it for you, Vikram. So his question was is it beneficial to start my research career with the branch that I wish to do my postgraduate in, or should I explore other branches?
I would say it doesn't matter in the beginning, because as an undergraduate student, especially, it doesn't matter what research you do, because you're building your understanding of research and you are making your research better and better. So I would suggest that at the beginning of your career, be field agnostic. Don't think about the branch, don't think about, like what exactly I'm going to do in life, because you would never know, right? And it would be unfortunate if now you think of a certain branch or a field and then you keep doing research in that, and then eventually you don't even choose it because that keeps changing sometimes, right? So it's best to just be free from the branch specifications, but focus more on the quality of the research, I would say. I think we had one more question, right? I think Elahe had sent the question to me, but I didn't know who it was from, I think.
It's from Shweta. It says she, I'm sorry, is asking, I'm working on a research project, an interventional research project regarding SDGs. I'm not sure what SDGs are, so if you're here, Shweta, if you'd like to explain. So basically, I've submitted a report for the same on ICMR STS and want to submit for a BMJ competition conducted by GCMR. Can she do that?
Yes, and I think, was it STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, maybe?
SDGs,
so,
I'm not sure what that is.
SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, I don't know. Yeah, so yes, you can do that. We have actually extended the last date of the case report submission to 10th of April. And we are going to announce that on the GCMER Instagram as well, that we have extended it. So yeah, feel free to submit that. Unless it's already published, you can submit anything, right? Don't worry about that. And if you have any doubts about what to submit, can I submit this, all of that. So we had actually done a webinar with the BMJ case reports coordinator, Mr. Anand, and he had gone into a lot of detail about like what's possible, what's not possible. The gist of the webinar was submit anything. Don't think about the rarity of diseases or anything like that. Just submit what you can. Because there is a chance that it'll be published even without you paying the fellowship fee, which is required to submit anything to BMJ. Okay. The form says that I have filled it before. I'm afraid I have not. Could you please look into it? I think that we use the same form for all activities. One thing that I can do, Elahe, do you have access to the form or is it only with the PR team?
I think it's only with PRD, but I can check.
Okay, no problem. Let me just call Rupali and tell her to make the access possible for like people to submit multiple responses if we are using the same form. I'll just tell her that. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, any doubts, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or Instagram. Okay, maybe she's sleeping. It's late. Okay, so yes, it was a great workshop. Thank you for participating, and thank you for being active participants. I always appreciate it. Thank you, Pranita. It was very nice having you as well and having all of your perspectives. And yeah, keep learning and keep getting better.
Thank you, Dr. Oshin. And if everyone would like to turn on your videos, and if we could take a picture.
Yes, that would be nice. Something for our PR team. They would be happy. Yes, thank you, Pranita, Nishant, Shrestha. Yes. Okay, let me know when you're taking the picture.
I've already taken with my phone, but we can again.
I will take another picture and I'll try to take it on my laptop so that it's like high definition. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay, I'm taking the picture, guys. Smile. Okay, no, it didn't happen. I'm going to take another one. You have to like press 2 buttons at the same time. So bad at this. No. I think it worked. I don't know. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining in, and I will see you at the next workshop. If you're not a GCMER member, please join us. We have expanded to a lot of countries, and the membership is lifetime at super affordable costs. We don't even charge as much as the other medical organizations, and we offer a lot of free memberships to other things. For example, you can join Futura Heal at a discount if you're a GCMER member, because you know we understand that it's a problem to pay for a lot of things. So yeah, feel free to join GCMER, join Futura Heal, and keep updated for the new workshops. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.